Welcome back to the Top Notch Documentaries YouTube channel. In today's video I shall be covering the chilling story of sexual sadist and likely serial killer David Parker Ray. This is going to be a pretty graphic video, and so I just wanted to warn you about the content that is going to be mentioned. The David Parker Ray case is a strange and unique one. The story of David Parker Ray and his long history of sickening crimes may not have been uncovered if it hadn't been for Cindy Vigil, a working girl who was kidnapped by Parker Ray and his then girlfriend Cindy Hendy. This took place on Saturday, March 20th of 1999. David Parker Ray had wanted what he described as a little plaything, while Cindy Hendy was scheduled to be visiting family in Washington State. The pair drove to Albuquerque and found Cindy Vigil. Parker Ray approached Vigil, pretending to be a John, and offered her money. She accepted the offer and got into his RV. Once inside, he removed a fake police badge and said that he was arresting her for solicitation. Cindy Hendy appeared and helped Parker Ray to handcuff Vigil. Once restrained, they put a metal collar around her neck and drove to Parker Ray's mobile home in Elephant Butte, just 7 miles north of the city Truth or Consequences in New Mexico. Cindy Vigil was chained to a bed inside the mobile home and subjected to horrific torture and sexual abuse for the next few days. She was shocked with a cattle prod, whipped with leather straps, and hung from the ceiling. And while she screamed in agony, the pair relished the torment. The pain being inflicted giving Parker Ray, and likely Cindy Hendy, a devious sexual high. A bit of backstory on David Parker Ray. David Parker Ray was a dangerous predator hiding in plain sight. He was a sexual sadist and likely a serial killer. He came off as being polite and well spoken. He was reserved and was described as being laid back, hosting the occasional barbecue and always returning to Elephant Butte in the summer when tourism levels rise because Elephant Butte Lake is a popular spot. In Truth or Consequences, the nearby city, where most Elephant Butte residents usually gather to drink and socialise, drug activity and crime were common. I just wanted to mention that this was during the 1990s. A lot has changed now. Drug taking, poverty and unemployment were rampant, and most were struggling to survive given the location and lack of any real opportunity. David Parker Ray seemed to be a model citizen. He stood out from the population in both areas. He wasn't retired, like the vast majority who lived in Elephant Butte, and he didn't have any criminal record or displayable criminal behaviour, like many in Truth or Consequences. The city tended to attract drifters and those with shady pasts. He worked as a truck and heavy machinery mechanic at the local state park and was skilled with his hands, crafting his own tools, with many of them being put to sinister use. Without any hint to predatory behaviour, he seemed like the most unlikely person to ever be pointed out as being a predator. David Parker Ray had formed a tight-knit circle around him for his own self-benefit. His daughter, Jessie Ray, was a drug dealer who helped to procure victims for her father. She was reserved, much like her father, but had an angry side. Roy Yancey, having been dishonourably discharged from the Navy, joined the group upon returning to the area. He was a known troublemaker in the area and had gotten Halloween cancelled one year because of his behaviour. And Cindy Hendy soon arrived in Truth or Consequences in 1997. Cindy Hendy had suffered a pretty horrific upbringing, having been sexually abused as a child by her stepfather. On telling her mother, she took his side over hers. The family dynamic in chaos, her life inevitably spiralled into drug addiction, crime and catastrophe. Moving to Truth or Consequences New Mexico in 1997, she had fled the authorities in Washington state on grand theft and drug charges. She would soon fall into the group of dangerous individuals. Mind you, she was pretty dangerous by this point also. She would meet Parker Ray that same year whilst on a work release program at Elephant Butte State Park. People around Cindy Hendy described her as having a Jekyll and Hyde personality, especially when she had been drinking. She would fight men and women in bars and made the comment to a friend that, "I love reading books about serial killers and now I'm living with one." Cindy Hendy told Parker Ray that, "I don't like women and I don't like men much either." Parker Ray revealed that he fell in love with Cindy Hendy soon after and the pair seemed to hit it off. Hendy moved into his mobile home. Now back to Cindy Vigil and her remarkable escape. Cindy Vigil knew that her life was in jeopardy given the horrific torture and torment that she had suffered for days. Thankfully, a higher power intervened, and on Monday the 22nd, whilst Parker Ray was out working and Hendy was supposed to be guarding Vigil, Vigil noticed an opportunity and took it. She managed to grab the key to the padlock around her neck and freed herself. Hendy had returned at the same moment and a struggle ensued. In the ensuing fight, Hendy was stabbed with an ice pick in the back of the neck, and Vigil ran naked from the mobile home. She managed to grab attention from a nearby resident and police were called. That same afternoon, and Parker Ray was apprehended driving his RV with Hendy. They were searching for Vigil. Parker Ray and Hendy were now in custody, but the case wasn't likely to be wrapped up anytime soon, at least not for a while. With a naked woman claiming the unthinkable, many locals and the authorities were stunned. Why was a woman naked with a collar and chains? And who were David Parker Ray and Cindy Hendy? The questions would soon be answered as the story eventually broke. It would be shortly after the arrests that a major search would be conducted. The month was April of 1999. It would be an unforgettable month in the Parker Ray investigation. More than 100 New Mexico State Police and FBI members arrived at Parker Ray's mobile home. They could be seen digging on the property and searching for evidence in his mobile home and trailer. Plenty of evidence was to be recovered during this search, the most shocking of which was to be uncovered in a $100,000 trailer on the property. Cindy Hendy had nicknamed the trailer for Parker Ray, and the name had stuck. It was called the Toy Box. Before entering the trailer, there was an association sticker for Arizona Highway Patrol, which read, "I support the best." It had small steps leading to the steel, reinforced door, and there were no windows. The door had once been double deadbolted. Clearly, Parker Ray didn't want anyone breaking inside. On entering the toy box, there was a "Home Sweet Home" sign on the wall. Evidently, this was Parker Ray's own dark and twisted reality. A sign on the wall read, "Satan's Den," which is how Parker Ray referred to the trailer. A tripod stood, attached with a camcorder next to the sign. It directed its attention toward a black, leather gynecologist chair. The chair was fitted with red straps and metal stirrups. A television was raised higher up, connected to the trailer ceiling. Its purpose was sinister. Tortured women could watch in horror exactly what Parker Ray was doing to them. The trailer, with its varying names and sickening contents, contained plenty of devious sexual devices and macabre possessions like breast clamps, nipple clamps, sandpaper, and even a smouldering iron. Parker Ray had a dark robe with a red cape, which he would tend to wear whilst violating his victims. A clipboard in the trailer helped investigators piece together the scale of the assaults and some of the crime timeline. It contained a tally chart of victims kidnapped between 1993 and 1997. It had a title called Kidnap Date, plus the number of assaults that had been inflicted. It was obvious that Parker A was very depraved. A bulletin board with the words, "The Law of Satanism" above it, had drawings of tortured women drawn up by Parker A. Photographs of victims were also on the board. One of these showed a woman hanging from a ceiling by her hands. Parker A was in the picture, much younger, wearing a satanic necklace. A warning list in the trailer had sentences like, "If she was worth taking, she is worth keeping," and "She must be subjected to hypnosis before the woman can be safely released." There's plenty to continue to list, but here are a few other interesting contents from the trailer. At the back of the trailer there was a cabinet. Inside it there were bottles of chloroform, hypodermic syringes, and 3 candles resting on top of a fake skull. Parker A had books in the cabinet also, many being about witchcraft and female anatomy. Underneath the cabinet, there was a confinement tray for keeping victims. A typed up list uncovered in the trailer had an instruction list for Parker A's followers. It explained how to torture women with machinery in the trailer. Very sick. With so much evil to take in, it may have ultimately led to a female FBI agent committing suicide not long after Parker A's arrest. She had spent 4 days looking through the trailer, and it probably contributed to her unexpected suicide. There was so much in the trailer which was likely connected to numerous unsolved crimes that the investigators decided to take the whole trailer. It was all a crime scene. The media were present to capture the search. Trailer now confiscated, and the mobile home search was next. It contained just as much incriminating evidence. An upside-down cross greeted visitors with a painting of 2 wolves chasing a rabbit in the mobile home. A fake police badge was found, along with different firearms. 75 true crime books, ones on Ted Bundy especially, had been picked up, and even more sick drawings were revealed in a binder. Linking to the false police badge were things found in Parker A's truck, a police scanner and flashing police lights, hinting to the idea that Parker A had used the ruse of being a police officer to abduct some of his victims. The area where Cindy Vigil had been chained was apparent. A mattress on the floor and human waste in a bucket expressed the lack of humanity shown to a fellow human being. 6 audio tapes were discovered, and they featured Parker A informing new victims exactly what he would do to them, and how he had already kidnapped 37 girls. One of the tape lines read, "We're basically like predators. We're always looking. I don't want to kill unless it's absolutely necessary. If I killed every victim I ever kidnapped, there'd be bodies all over the country." One of these tapes included Parker A discussing how he had contracted VD from a prostitute in Arizona. He was annoyed and returned to the area to search for her. He soon found her, luring her with the promise of money, before subjecting her to a brutal assault in his trailer. Her fate is uncertain. Another tape included Parker A speaking over a background of religious instrumental music. He was speaking to a future captive and talked about his satanic group. He exclaimed that his role was a dungeon master and animal sacrifices and chants were to occur. The unfortunate captive would experience 10 hours of pure hell. "Satan is a harsh taskmaker," Parker A said. Search completed, and it would seem that only Parker A's close circle knew the true darkness that lurked beneath the surface. He had grown up in New Mexico and said that there hadn't been any attention paid to him as a youngster. His father was absent in his childhood and only appeared in his life to give him detective magazines, which showcase S&M, BDSM, non-consensual violence towards women basically. Parker Ray then began developing violent sexual fantasies, likely as a partial result. He admitted to making bombs and then exploding them in the woods, much like Israel Keys. Be sure to check out the interviews of him on my channel. David Parker Ray sat in the local jail, reading books on serial killers. He wrote his name on them and sent them to female prisoners in the jail. He had gained a local celebrity status since the media arrival and was lapsing up the attention. As more information came out about the case, and even more media attention appeared in New Mexico, new victims surfaced. Kelly Van Cleve had been drugged and taken from the Blue Water Saloon in Truth or Consequences. She last remembered Parker Ray's daughter, Jessie, offering her a ride home. Her memory was foggy, but nightmares emerged later after the ordeal. Luckily, she'd been spared by Parker Ray, but she soon realised that the nightmares that she'd been experiencing were actually real. On remembering the experience over the course of a few years, she recalled that Parker Ray had told her that he was part of a satanic group and that he'd been watching her. They wanted Kelly as a sex toy. A similar story likely happened with Roy Yancey's former girlfriend Marie Parker. Marie Parker was a woman struggling with addiction issues and homelessness. She loved her children and was a good person at heart, but it was tough for her to support her kids, given her drug dependency. She would be last seen at a bar in Truth or Consequences on July 5th, 1997. She had connections to Parker Ray also, as she was living by Elephant Butte Lake in a tent given to her by him. She vanished off the face of the earth, and her fate wasn't known until Cindy Hendy began to spill the beans on the Parker Ray case. Cindy Hendy had been charged with 25 felonies and was facing a 197-year sentence if convicted. Hit with 2 counts of sexual penetration and 1 count of conspiracy to commit a kidnapping, she would end up cooperating and turning on Parker Ray and Roy Yancey. Her charges were lowered to just 5 felonies and much less time of incarceration. She told investigators that Parker Ray admitted to killing at least 14 people, both men and women, burying them in New Mexico, along with submerging them in Elephant Butte Lake. Detailed maps with X's of the lake had already been found in Parker Ray's mobile home, and a body had been removed from the lake in 1989, later identified to be Parker Ray's former boss in Phoenix, Arizona. Parker Ray was working at Canal Motors from around 1982 until 1988. His boss had last been seen at Canal Motors on September 22nd of 1998. He didn't like him, and the pair were reported to be frequently arguing. Cindy Hendy also shed light on Marie Parker's fate. She told investigators that Roy Yancey had killed Marie Parker in 1997 under orders from Parker Ray. She said that Yancey was a follower of Parker Ray's satanic group. Parker Ray wasn't hit with any murder charges of his own, despite ordering a murder. Yancey even further directed blame toward him. Authorities searched for bodies and didn't locate any solid answers. As searches continued, Parker Ray's life was examined more. In 1959, Parker Ray got married and then joined the army and went to Korea in 1960. The army didn't last long for Parker Ray, and on returning in 1961, he divorced his first wife and began dividing his time between New Mexico, Texas and Oklahoma. Parker Ray travelled between states and would work different jobs. He attended an aircraft mechanics school in Tulsa, Oklahoma. By this point, he was in his second marriage, and that soon inevitably fell apart. 2 marriages ended, and it was now 1981. He drove with his ex-wife's sister to California and grew marijuana in the hills. They lived in a trailer for a year and then left. Ending up in Arizona, Parker Ray worked at Canal Motors in Phoenix, a used car dealership. Years passed. All the while, Parker Ray thought about the sexual fantasies. Parker Ray was a very sinister, sick individual. He was a sexual sadist, most definitely. He described himself to investigators as being a time bomb and was fantasizing about kidnapping 10 and 11-year-olds by the time that he was caught. Hendy also approved of the idea, apparently. He suggested that he be sterilised, and he seemed to portray himself as being the main victim of a curse of some kind. He mentioned that, "My life has been a private hell for 40 years, yet never considered stopping until he was apprehended." Fortunately, he was stopped by Cindy Vigil and was eventually given 224 years total. However, in a cruel twist of fate for his victims, he died from heart failure following the prison booking process on May 28th of 2002. He hadn't served 1 day in prison. As part of Parker Ray's plea deal before he died, his daughter had received a heavily reduced prison sentence despite her participation in some of the crimes. Yancey and Hendy were hit with many years in prison. Many people focus on Parker Ray in this chilling story, but the fact that there were others involved makes this story even more cold and sinister. One of the tapes in question brings in this idea. A woman can be heard screaming in the background whilst Parker Ray is creating a tape. Parker Ray tells the people to put a gag on her. A female accomplice touches the woman with a cigarette, and Parker Ray says, "But I told her not to do it anymore. I don't particularly like that, not because of the pain, because we're in the business of pain, but because cigarette burns kind of messes up a woman's appearance, and that doesn't turn me on." The Parker Ray case underlines the predators that exist within our society, blending into the community and projecting a decent image. Parker Ray's life revolved around his behaviour. His trailer, or toy box, was expensive, and everything that he and his group did was normalised and acceptable. One of his children, Jesse Ray, turned out to be just as bad as him, whilst Parker Ray commented on his son, David Ray Jr., saying, "My son and I don't have much in common. He's a fundamentalist Christian, and he doesn't like to party." There were some warning signs about Parker Ray. Most of these revolve around him being a shifty character. He was seen stealing a transmission cooler and wasn't fired, just given 30 days of unpaid leave from work. He never offered to do any overtime at work and didn't work hard at all. The only times that he offered to do any work was when there were tourist parties during the summer months. He was eager to get involved then. The final warning sign was the twisted smile that apparently formed on his face whenever a sex conversation arose around work colleagues. His eyes would sparkle. Thankfully, his crimes were uncovered and his actions were punished, despite his unexpected death. Hopefully, the surviving victims have found a way to move past the dreadful events that they have experienced and can find some sort of closure in the fact that he is deceased and no longer able to harm another woman. To this day, many victims haven't been identified and bodies of Parker Ray's victims haven't been recovered. A few hints to some of the victim identities include, but not limited to, Parker Ray wrote in his journal about an Oriental woman who is likely Jill Troyer. She was dating Parker Ray's daughter and is suspected to be a victim. She vanished in October of 1995. Victim souvenirs may also be eventually linked to potential victims if loved ones come forward to identify them. Hopefully some families can get some answers. I hope that you've learned something from this video, and I appreciate all of your continued support on my channel. As always, thanks for watching.